joining us now is former Secretary of State for the United States of America, Mike Pompeo, who is our senior counsel for global affairs. Mike, we have talked about the threat of China infiltrating the universities through funding and grants. But this situation in North Dakota is very unique because here you have a sensitive military base and the Chinese Communist Party connected businesses, and these are controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, purchasing or attempting to purchase farmland almost adjacent to this Air Force base. And you ask yourself, why would the Chinese Communist Party want to buy farmland in North Dakota? How serious is that? First of all, how serious is the threat from China? And then we'll talk about what their actions are here. How serious is the Chinese threat?
Jay, Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, has made very clear his intention. He wants to undermine the Western way of life, the things that we value here, our human rights here in the United States, our ability to practice our faith in the United States, our ability to grow businesses in the United States. He's made clear he wants to change that. He wants to be the global hegemon. He wants our kids and grandkids to live in a world that looks more like what you see happening today in China with the lockdowns and the surveillance state, to look more like that than the America that we know and love. This is a serious threat. It is one of the greatest threats to the United States in all of our history now, 250 plus years. And this effort to now buy properties in and around American military installations is one thread in that threat profile.
Let's talk about that one for a moment, because when we got word of this, and the American Center for Law and Justice is working on it, but our ACLJ Action, our 501c4, is also working on this. I think it'd be important, Mr. Secretary, to explain to our audience why the Chinese government, companies, because these are owned by the Chinese Communist Party, why would they acquire property like this? What is the reason?
Yeah, you make two good points to start. One is there's no such thing as a private company in China. I think that's important for everybody in North Dakota and Kansas and California, everybody to understand. There's no such thing. When they show up with a private company name, it's truly just their military, the People's Liberation Army, or their Communist Party itself with a facade, with a fake front. Second, why are they doing this? It's not to grow crops. It's not to make lives better for the people of North Dakota. It's not a full employment act for that great state. It is so they can surveil that space. It is so they can come to understand who's moving, what's going where, who the suppliers are, and to be in and around an important strategic military base is something of great value to the Chinese Communist Party's leadership. I often think, Jay, the reverse of this. Imagine an American company trying to buy a property adjacent to a Chinese military base in western part of China. Do you think there's any chance that they would let that happen? No, because we would learn from that, and we would benefit from that, and it would harm their nation if we had our government owning an installation next to their military base. That's what we're permitting to happen. We ought to do all we can to push back against this, not only in North Dakota, but everywhere, Jay.
Mike, you served as the director of the CIA as well as being Secretary of State. And when we talk about the Chinese Communist Party's surveillance capabilities, people sometimes underestimate how sophisticated their surveillance can be.
Unrivaled, Jay. One of the scariest things that I saw as CIA director was the scope and scale of the Chinese Communist Party's surveillance state. And not just inside their own country. It is like nothing you've seen inside the country. To move in Beijing is to be captured. Your face, your whereabouts, your movements are captured every day inside the country. But their efforts around the world are unequaled as well. They are owned Tencent, Alibaba. These are data companies. Well, we've talked about TikTok a couple of times, Jay, where they're collecting American information. They've done this. You talked about universities and research institutions where they're collecting data on Americans, and they're putting it in their big databases, applying artificial intelligence, and developing the capacity to perform surveillance like no nation has ever been able to do in the history of man's time on this earth. It is staggering, Jay.
So one of the other issues that's happening is Speaker Pelosi is doing a scheduled trip to Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party have said there'll be, quote, severe negative impact on the political foundation of China-U.S. relations. How should we react to this basically threat from, I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi on anything, really, or very little, but the idea that the Speaker of the House of the United States is traveling to Taiwan and the Chinese issuing a threat, what is the messaging there?
Well, look, they're trying to stop us from doing what is right, which to acknowledge that Taiwan is not part of China. The history is very clear. It never was, never has been, and if America performs its mission right, never will be part of China. Xi Jinping's intent on bringing it inside, and the fact that Speaker Pelosi is planning to go there. I was there earlier this year. I'm likely to head back before too long. We should be able to freely travel where Americans want to travel. We ought to recognize Taiwan as the independent sovereign nation that it is. And I think Speaker Pelosi's trip should continue. And we should make clear to the Chinese that if they do something that is inconsistent with Taiwan being an independent nation, there will be real costs imposed on them.
We have a Taiwanese defense pact. It doesn't necessarily require military action, but if China were to make a move on Taiwan militarily, what it should be the world response? Because we've seen the response in Ukraine, which has been, chaotic to say the least. What happens if the Chinese, because there was a lot of thought that the Chinese government was going to move on Taiwan while the Ukraine-Russia conflict was going on, and still could happen. How do we respond to that if they were to make a military move?
Right. No, Jay, that risk is still very real. Two thoughts. One is the most important thing one can do as a leader of the free world is establish deterrence. It's what President Biden has lost. He lost it when we left Afghanistan. He reduced America's power and influence in the world. And we saw what's happening to the Ukrainian people as a result of that. So with respect to Taiwan, we should be using this time, this day, this moment to do what we've agreed to do, to give them the tools to defend themselves. Were Xi to take an actual military attack on Taiwan, there are many tools, some of which I just don't want to get into, but there are many tools that the West, not just the United States, but Japan, South Korea, Australia, all of the people that care about the freedom-loving people of the Pacific, there are lots of things that we could do in response to that, and I hope we've communicated that very clearly to Xi, that should he undertake such an effort, there will be real costs for China and the Chinese Communist Party to pay. I
want to move to the energy situation. Obviously, we're having very high oil and gas prices still. Come down a little bit, but it's still very, very high. The president went after the oil and gas companies in the United States saying you need to be producing more. At the same time, he was telling them in 3 to 5 years, you're going to be out of business because we're going to do away with fossil fuels. And then he was threatening really threatening these oil and gas companies. He wanted to know their income, their marketing, and all of this, profits. What is the White House trying to accomplish here? And how we were not long ago, but under your administration, we're talking about 19 months ago, we were energy independent. Now we're not only dependent, the president went over begging Saudi Arabia for more oil, and it doesn't look like that happened.
Yes, it looks like that part of his effort failed. That's too bad. I would love them, OPEC, to produce more energy as well, Saudi and all the others. Most importantly, I wish we'd produce more here. This is something you've been very engaged in, Jay, you and your team at the ACLJ, right, pushing back on the regulatory state inside the United States. The difference between now and what seems like forever, but is only 19 months ago, was that we applauded private companies that were out investing, right, taking risks, delivering good affordable products to the American people. We encouraged that. We didn't penalize them, and we didn't have this unrealistic dream, this dream that you could transition off of fossil fuels with no backup plan and impose massive costs on the American people and American families. This was foolish. This became a bit of a religion for them, right? It's kind of an article of faith that you could power America with sunshine and windmills. Sadly, they began to punish the very firms that could produce the affordable energy so parents could drive their kids to soccer games, and elderly couples on fixed incomes that are going to have to heat their homes this winter could afford to do so. This was an enormous political mistake. It was a decision made by the Biden administration, and now the American people are paying the price for that.
Last question. Not so noticed Supreme Court case drastically limited the ability of the administrative state to achieve this through their climate agenda through rulemaking, which people ignore, but it's very important. This rulemaking creates a whole new body of law. Do you see the president he's talking about coming out with an emergency executive order on climate change? Is this another way to get around the regulatory safeguards that were put in place by the Supreme Court 2 weeks ago?
I suspect it is. I suspect it's one part an attempt to circumvent what the Supreme Court did, and second part political panic.
Yep.
So somewhere in between those two. Unfortunately, no matter what it is he does, I am confident that it is very likely to continue to drive energy prices higher. When you deny the most affordable energy to the American people, this is bad for the American economy. We may well see a recession as a result of this. It would really be tragic, and it is. You have to just keep in mind, this is a choice. This wasn't Putin's energy price. This was President Biden and the progressive left's effort to undermine the very affordable energy that Americans have come to rely on, and we ought to head back. It's simple to go back to the policies we had